Hello there folks, welcome back to the Chap's Guide. My name is Ash and I am your host on this journey through men's style, self-development and personal grooming. Now, as you know, on the channel I like to think about the influences which make style what it is today, where elements of the style that we wear and take for granted originated from. It really helps in perhaps having more of an association with your clothing. It makes you feel perhaps more proud to wear it if you know where it comes from, and you can take another layer of pleasure from your clothing if you understand its evolutionary journey to how it is today. And today I'm going to answer a question from a viewer about military uniform. If you're wondering why this camouflage jacket here is on the table, it directly relates to what we're going to talk about, and it's a little bit of inspiration for me as we discuss this, because this is more of a discussion piece than a lecture really, because this is my old combat jacket from my own military service. So I'm going to use that to inspire me to think about, how to answer the question. So the question comes from Harry, who has said, military uniforms in the past had a large effect on men's fashion and style, from introducing trench coats, pea coats, desert boots and so on. I don't find much in the modern military uniforms that are particularly stylish. Much is camouflage, utilitarian, and even the US Army has gone back to World War II for its dress uniform inspiration. What are your thoughts on this? So I took some time to sit down and reflect upon my military service, the uniforms as they were then, as they are now, because I work for a military charity these days and I actually go onto bases and meet the modern day versions of myself 35 years ago. So I can see how the evolutionary process has changed. My father, 93 years of age, he was a soldier in the late 1940s, and I've got images of him. So I can throw back and see how things have changed in that whole generation of military service. And an enormous amount has indeed changed. And you are right, Harry. Military uniforms have historically had a real major influence on the way us chaps choose to dress in daily life. All the items you mentioned, and you spoke about desert boots, trench coats, pea coats and so on, they have their roots in the military. And there are many more, of course. We can talk about blazers, we can talk about trench coats and things like that, bomber jackets, which all had their start in the military. And even now, many of those items we hold in a vaulted status because of their ruggedness, their style, their simplicity, their practicality. They just get the job done. And because of that, they've been in men's wardrobes all these years. However, the influence of the military uniform has definitely been on a decline in the last few years. Contemporary fashion of the era that we see today has a few flavours of the military in there somewhere, but they are far between and hard to sort of notice really unless you go out looking for it. But when we look back to the past, that was very different in years gone by, where the military, the way that soldiers, sailors and airmen dressed directly affected the ordinary person on the street. That is much less the case today when it comes to modern style. So today I'm going to have a look at 4 discussion points, shall we call them, that I've been able to dredge up from my own mind, which gives us an idea of how we can answer Harry's question. Why is it that military style plays such a small influence in modern men's clothing? So the first thing I'm going to talk about really is how the evolution of military uniforms has gone from style to total utility. And if we have to look backwards, don't we, as we often do, to find out why we are as we are today. Let's look to the past. And in years gone by, military uniforms were not solely designed and made purely for function. There were many more elements expected of a military uniform. They were meant to convey authority. They were meant to show people that we were very professional. They displayed prestige. If you were from a country which is wealthy and had a powerful military, that would often be reflected in the uniforms of the 18th and 19th century. They were also made to convey pride to the people who wore them. So when a uniform was distinctive in its appearance, it made that individual feel as if they were very much definitely a part of a body, a special entity of people. And it gave them pride in the way they dressed. But that's to a degree changed since the 18th and 19th centuries. Uniforms back then, they were very elaborate. You know, if you look at some of those uniforms from that era, they had a very tailored fit. They were very close to the body. They had intricate details upon them. They were in powerful colours with lots of lace and other fancy bits. Distinctive in very much in their way. You could tell one country's uniform apart from another with an immediate glance, even just by looking at the colour. You could tell where they came from. I mean, in the UK, Great Britain, famously the soldiers wore red. They were called redcoats. So you could tell immediately on the battlefield who was friend, who was foe. And this was conveyed across to the civilian world. In the style, in the colour, in the cut, everything was something which moved across into the civilian world. Even more recent times, in the 20th century, there was still evolution taking place in the way that the military uniform affected civilian clothing. If we look at the First World War and the evolution of the trench coat, originally soldiers, particularly officers who had the money to do so, they wore greatcoats, big, thick woolen overcoats, which were great at keeping warm, but somewhat restrictive in daily use. So people commissioned their tailors to make what we now know as the trench coat, a thinner, more easily mobile coat made of water-resistant material. And of course we know the story. Burberry came up with the trench coat, and only very recently I was visiting the National Army Museum in London, and sure enough there was an original trench coat on display. That journey from military practicality, now in the civilian world, you know, most intentionally well-dressed men will have a trench coat of some kind in their wardrobe, and we can see how it, you know, that silhouette of the trench coat has come across to civilian life. However, the focus on military uniforms over more recent years, since World War II, has absolutely been about utility, about camouflage, above all else. I mean, generally speaking, if you look at the militaries of the larger nations, their uniforms are to a degree hard to distinguish between each other, because when you're going for camouflage, you are dressing for the environment. As you can see, I'm in the woodland. I've got a woodland style, now obsolete camouflage. The idea is to make you less noticeable to your enemy. And of course, if the enemy is fighting in the same environment, they're going to have a very similar camouflage as well. So that difference between countries has very much changed. If you look at the modern military uniform, there is very little in there which you will find to be trend-setting in any way. They are all solely designed for function, for utility, so that soldiers are able to do their jobs well. Perhaps in answer to a part to Harry's question there, that is why military uniforms no longer are something which correlates directly to the way us gentlemen dress in the modern world. And I think carrying that point on a little further, really it is the rise of the camo and the utilitarian outfit, which is why we don't see it being reflected in civilian life. I mean, yes, it could be said that many streetwear brands, mostly a little niche, I would have to say, do look towards the military for some inspiration. You will see the combat boot occasionally coming round again as something which is practical. You'll see a little bit of camouflage being reflected in streetwear outfits, but it's not in its intended form. You know, it's not camouflage as such. It's more of an expressionist subculture tool rather than something which is included in somebody's wardrobe for its actual purpose. I mean, my son likes a brand called Bathing Ape, which I think it's very expensive, but you do see a bit of camouflage in their sort of catalogue from time to time. But as I say, it's counterculture rather than for its intended purpose. So yeah, I think it's the utilitarian nature of the military uniform these days which makes them less adaptable to civilian life. There's no crossover appeal there. Modern men don't want to wear a shapeless combat jacket because Why would they? And I think that's why, military influence has died away to a degree. Now, to keep the conversation flowing about, where are we with tradition and heritage, I find it very interesting that the US military has had to look backwards for inspiration for their, what do they call it, the Army Green Service uniform, because they looked for inspiration because their own uniform perhaps wasn't meeting their needs. It wasn't modern enough, trendy enough. It wasn't attracting maybe enough recruits. And in order to change that narrative, they've looked back to the halcyon days of the US military. At that time, World War II, the world undoubtedly owes an enormous debt to the US military, riding to the aid of the old world when Europe had fallen to the Nazis and the cavalry came calling. The vast US army essentially turned the tide and the war was won for by the right people, we would say. But at that time, the military uniform was very much as we imagine that sort of classic heritage. And the modern day US Army Green Service uniform is a direct derivative of that World War II uniform called pinks and greens. Very distinctive, let's be honest, they are tapping directly into the nostalgia which comes from that appearance of that uniform, which is almost museum-like in its appearance. When you see it today, you think, my God, it's incongruous with the utilitarian uniform of day-to-day wear. You see the Army Green Service uniform as it looks like it's walked out of the Army Museum, basically. But I think it hits that nail on the head, what they were looking for. It reconnects with the soldier who perhaps looks back to the zenith period of the American military and says, yes, this was when they were at their very best, when they achieved the greatest achievement that they'll probably ever have to their credit. And we can draw inspiration from the uniforms that were worn when. They give power and pride to the people who wear them today. I think it's really interesting that they've done that. And that trend towards historical uniforms, I think the fact that they've done that underlines the fact that the modern military uniform lacks that punch. It really does lack that drama and impact that those uniforms from that era had. It was a brave person who made the decision to go back to a historical uniform and bring it back to the modern world. And I think they did the right thing. So, kind of rounding off, we've got to say, what is the future of military influence in the mainstream style world for men today? And, the current landscape of military uniforms, well, it divides the way that I look at it. On one side, you've got the enduring legacy and the undoubted style of items like pea coats, trench coats, bomber jackets, things like that. Combat boots. They're always going to be with us. They're always going to be reinterpreted by designers, clothing manufacturers as time goes on, because they are timeless. They're always going to be there. They're all in my wardrobe at home, and there always will be. But I think the modern trend of uniforms, which are shapeless, utilitarian, working clothes basically, I don't think we'll see that coming over. Those days are gone. I don't think you'll see people wearing combat jackets in the street anymore. I think that era is now past. There's very little crossover into the civilian world. But who knows what we'll see in the future. As modern military uniforms evolve, for necessity, into performance fabrics and things like that, wearable technology, we might see the military influencing the civilian world more in the future. So it's interesting to see which way it goes. My final words really are just to say, I think it's interesting, isn't it? I think that the wheel of style has spun. And whereas perhaps the civilian world is now less influenced by military attire, I think it might be the other way round. Civilian life might be influencing the military. Because if you look at the uniforms, the dress uniforms of US Space Command, which is a spectacular outfit, I have to say, it is impossible to look at those uniforms and say to yourself that the man or woman who designed them was not a super fan of Star Trek or Star Wars or some sort of science fiction TV program, because without doubt that is a direct step away from the traditional military into something quite futuristic. And I just find it really interesting to see where it goes in the future. I have to say the UK military uniforms are much slow to evolve, much slower. They seem to be somewhat static. The Army number 1 uniform, the Royal Air Force uniform, the Royal Navy uniform, they seem to be as they were when I served, mostly 35 or so years ago. So their evolution is much slower. We haven't deviated away, so we didn't have to deviate back. That's one way of looking at it. But it's interesting to see which way it goes. And thank you, Harry, for posing the topic from which we've had the opportunity to talk about today. Now, if you'd like to send me a question or a talking point to get my views, drop it into the comment section or send me an email. I'm the only person who reads my emails. Nobody else sees them. My eyes only. So you can send me anything you like. Total discretion, no judgment. I'd be delighted to read them. If you've enjoyed the video, like it, subscribe for more. And if you want to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee or even become a member of my Patreon group, which get extra videos at least once a week. So, what will the military give us next? Who's to know? Until the next time, take care. And I'll see you again very soon.